You know that feeling? Wheels up, climbing out, the world just shrinking below. It's amazing.
It really is. Nothing quite like it.
But we both know that amazing feeling comes hand in hand with risk, right?
Absolutely. Every single flight involves managing potential dangers. It's constant.
And that's what we're diving into today, isn't it? How pilots actually, well, manage that risk.
Exactly. We're using the Risk Management Handbook as our guide. It's pretty much essential reading for anyone involved in flying.
Right. So think of this deep dive as your shortcut. We're pulling out the key ideas from the handbook specifically for you, the learner.
Our aim is to show you how pilots think about safety, how they build confidence, and honestly, how they make sure they can actually enjoy flying.
Yeah, it's not just about avoiding bad things. It's about enabling the good stuff, too.
That's the mission. Extract that practical knowledge, those insights, so you understand the how and why behind pilot risk management.
Okay, let's get into it. Chapter 1, Introduction to Risk Management. What's the first big takeaway?
Well, the handbook immediately makes a distinction. It says, look, we're talking about individual pilot risk management here.
Not the big, complex safety management systems or SMS that airlines use.
Exactly. Those are organizational tools. This is about what you do in the cockpit, on your flight, personal responsibility.
Gotcha. The handbook also mentions the NTSB and FAA roles after something goes wrong.
Right. Briefly, the NTSB investigates accidents, figures out the probable cause, makes recommendations.
And the FAA?
They look at the broader picture. Are there issues with training, certification, air traffic procedures, that kind of thing?
To make it real, the handbook includes an NTSB report excerpt, right? A tough example.
Yeah, it's a sobering one. A pilot flying into worsening weather after a vacuum pump failed. Critical instrument gone.
And the outcome?
Tragically, loss of control during the approach. Fatal. The handbook highlights how the pilot's decisions compounded the initial failure.
So it wasn't just the equipment failure. It was the decision to press on into bad weather without that key instrument.
Precisely. It shows how poor risk management decisions can create a chain reaction. It's rarely just one thing.
That leads nicely into a tool the handbook introduces early on, the PAVE checklist. PAVE.
Yep. Super useful mnemonic. Pilot, aircraft, environment, and external pressures. It helps you sort through potential hazards systematically.
Okay, let's break that down. P for pilot. What falls under that?
Well, it's not just about whether you can fly the plane. It's about you. Are you fit to fly? The handbook gives an example of a pilot asked to fly after only 4 hours sleep.
Definitely a hazard.
And they rightly said no. Even something like sinus congestion counts affects pressure equalization,
Right. Okay, A for aircraft.
This is the plane itself. Is it airworthy? Is the equipment working? Performance okay? The example given is finding an oil drip during pre-flight.
Just a small drip.
Yeah, but the pilot investigated turned out to be a loose hose fitting. Catching that on the ground, huge. Could have been disastrous in the air.
Good catch. Then V, environment. That seems obvious, like weather.
Weather is a big part, absolutely. Unexpected thunderstorms, icing, fog. But it's broader, too.
Like what?
Terrain, obstacles, airport conditions, even wake turbulence from other planes. The handbook mentions a pilot getting caught in the wake of a heavy jet.
Okay. And finally, external pressures.
This one's subtle but powerful. It's that feeling of needing to get there. Pressure from passengers, schedules, business meetings.
The handbook example.
A pilot on a ferry flight, tight schedule, realized they'd be landing with minimal fuel in iffy weather. They chose to stop for fuel. Safety over schedule.
Smart move. So if we connect PAV back to that NTSB report.
You can see it clearly. The pilot downplaying the weather after the instrument failure. Maybe a hazardous attitude. That's P, pilot.
Failed vacuum system and instruments.
Definitely A, aircraft. Flying into the bad weather, the clouds, and low visibility.
That's V, environment.
Right, and maybe there was pressure to complete the trip. That's the E, external pressure. It often involves multiple PAV elements.
Right. It really drives home the point that poor risk management is often the common thread in accidents.
It absolutely is. Which takes us neatly into Chapter 2, personal minimums.
Okay, personal minimums. These aren't the legal FAA minimums, are they?
No, they're your minimums. Self-imposed limits, usually stricter than the regulations, based on your own experience, your proficiency, your comfort level.
So it's about adding an extra safety buffer.
Exactly. And building confidence. Knowing your limits helps you make safer decisions.
The handbook has a 6-step process for setting these.
It does. Step 1 is really understanding the official weather categories. VFR, MVFR, IFR, LIFR.
Visual flight rules, marginal VFR, instrument flight rules, low IFR.
Right. Figure 2.1 in the handbook lays out the ceiling and visibility criteria for each. You need to know what those mean first.
Makes sense. Step 2.
Assess yourself, honestly. What's your actual experience? How comfortable are you flying in different conditions? Figure 2.2 is like a template for this self-assessment.
Certificates, ratings, total time, recent experience, that kind of thing.
All of that. How much night time? How much actual instrument time? Be specific.
And figures 2.3 and 2.4 give examples of how someone might fill this out.
Yeah, they show a sample pilot setting their VFR, MVFR minimums for day and night in figure 2.3. Maybe they're okay with lower visibility during the day, but want much better conditions at night.
And figure 2.4 does the same for IFR, LIFR conditions.
Exactly. Maybe you're legally current for IFR, but you don't feel comfortable going right down to minimums unless conditions are a bit better. That's your personal minimum.
Figure 2.5 just combines those views.
Yep, puts it all together for weather.
Okay. Step 3. What else besides weather?
Other conditions. Wind and turbulence, figure 2.6, helps you think about your limits there. And aircraft performance factors, figure 2.7.
Performance factors like?
Runway length needed, density altitude impact, flying over high terrain. How comfortable are you with shorter runways or operations at high altitude airports?
So you consider weather, wind, turbulence, performance. Step 4 is putting it all together.
Right. Assemble your baseline minimums. Figure 2.8 shows an example table, a clear reference for your go-no-go decisions.
But that's just the baseline. Step 5 says adjust for specific conditions.
Yes, because not every flight is the same. Are you tired today? Flying an unfamiliar plane? Going to an airport you've never seen before? Feeling rushed?
Those are all reasons to be more conservative.
Absolutely. Figure 2-9 shows examples. Maybe you add 500 feet to your usual ceiling minimum or require a longer runway if you're feeling a bit off.
The handbook has some strong cautions here, though.
Crucial ones. Never, ever adjust your minimums downwards just to make a specific trip. That defeats the whole purpose.
Set them objectively beforehand.
Right, and adjust one variable at a time if you're changing your baseline. Also, talk to an instructor if you're making big changes.
And the final step, step 6.
Stick to the plan. This is about discipline. It makes the tough calls easier, especially with passengers. You have a clear, predefined reason to say no, not today.
Takes some of the pressure off.
It does. The handbook also gives a quick mention to the FAA Wings program, great resource for continuing education and improving safety.
So personal minimums are fundamentally about reducing the probability of getting into a bad situation in the first place.
Precisely. It's proactive safety management tailored just for you.
Okay, that leads us to Chapter 3, identifying hazards and their associated risks. First, defining terms. Hazard versus risk.
Super important distinction. A hazard, according to the regs, is basically any condition that could lead to an accident.
Like ice on the runway.
That's a hazard. Risk, though, is the combination of how likely that hazard is to cause a problem and how severe the outcome would be.
The handbook uses a street crossing analogy.
Yeah, the traffic is the hazard. Stepping off the curb creates the risk. The risk depends on how much traffic there is, how fast it's moving, how aware you are.
Makes sense. Why do hazards lead to accidents? The handbook says training isn't enough.
Training is essential, but it can't cover every single possibility. You need discipline analysis, not just luck. That full cup of luck, empty cup of experience idea.
We want to fill the experience cup before the luck cup runs out.
That's the goal. Through careful hazard identification and risk management.
The chapter uses case studies again.
Yes, 2 powerful ones. First, a low-time pilot in a rental, partial engine failure at night. Lost control during the forced landing.
Multiple factors there, night, engine issue, maybe lack of experience in that situation.
Exactly. And the second one involves professional airline pilots. Engine flame out after a stall.
Even experienced pros aren't immune.
No. The NTSB found unprofessional behavior, not following procedures, poor airmanship, even checklist issues contributed. It's a stark reminder.
These studies highlight the need to recognize risks, which brings us to hazardous attitudes. Figure 3.1 lists 5.
Yep. Anti-authority, don't tell me what to do. Impulsivity, do something quickly. Invulnerability, it won't happen to me. Macho, I can do it, watch this. Resignation, what's the use?
And crucially, Figure 3.2 gives the antidotes, the ways to counteract these.
Right. For anti-authority, it's follow the rules, they're usually right. For impulsivity, not so fast, think first, and so on. Recognizing the attitude is the first step to applying the antidote.
The macho steed buzzing the park example shows how these can stack up.
Perfectly. A whole chain of bad thinking. Using the antidotes breaks that chain.
The handbook also looks at the statistics leading causes of fatal GA accidents.
Yeah, FAA data showed loss of control in flight, LOCI, controlled flight into terrain, CFIT, system component failure power plant, SCFPP, and fuel-related issues were the top ones historically.
And the underlying theme often comes back to
Inadequate risk management. The accident type is the outcome, but often poor decisions or unrecognized hazards led up to it.
Okay, so how do pilots identify these hazards systematically?
Several methods. Visual observation, looking carefully. Thorough pre-flight planning, whether no TAMS route. Using onboard equipment, GPS, weather data, radio communication, talking to ATC, flight service, and even post-flight inspections. Did anything change during the flight?
And the PAVE checklist comes back again as a framework.
Yes, it's a great way to organize your hazard span. The handbook then goes deeper into each PAVE element.
Let's touch on those. Pilot hazards revisited.
Goes beyond just fatigue, qualifications, currency, proficiency, are you really sharp for this flight? And aeromedical factors, the IMSAFE checklist from Figure 3.3 is key here.
IMSAFE. Illness, medications, stress, alcohol, fatigue, emotion eating.
Right. That self-assessment before every single flight is critical.
Aircraft hazards in more detail.
Performance is big. Do you have the fuel, range, climb capability, weight and balance correct? And equipage redundancy, autopilot status, any inoperative equipment. Does the plane have what you need for this specific flight?
The environment hazards expanded.
Huge category. Weather details, thunderstorms, icing, visibility, terrain, mountains, density, altitude effects, flying over water. Facilities, airport conditions, runway contamination, available approaches and lighting, airspace complexity, ATC services, other traffic, and the specific challenges of night flying.
Lots to consider there. And external pressures again.
Mainly that pressure to complete the mission. Personal trips, business travel. It can make you downplay other risks. You have to consciously fight that pressure.
The handbook uses the Elkins, West Virginia airport example to show hazard combinations.
Yeah. Figures 3.4 and 3.5, flying into that valley airport. During the day, VFR, the terrain is visible, manageable.
But at night?
Much higher risk. The terrain hazard is amplified by the lack of visual cues. Hazards often interact.
That leads to flight risk assessment tools or FRENCHI.
Right. A way to systematically organize the hazards you've identified and assess the overall risk.
Two types mentioned, numerical and narrative.
Numerical frats, like Figure 3 to 6, use scores. Quick, but can sometimes mask a single high risk if the total score is low, or the scoring might feel arbitrary.
Narrative frats.
Like Figure 3 to 7, more descriptive. You analyze the likelihood and severity of each risk. Takes more thought, but often leads to a deeper understanding.
And this is where the Tricia case study comes in. Planning a flight from Durango to Santa Rosa.
Yes. We get the background pilot, passengers, aircraft, weather. Figure 3 to 9 shows the initial direct route plan.
And Figure 310 shows Tricia using PAVE to list out the specific hazards she sees for this particular flight.
Exactly. She's identified the potential problems. Now she needs to figure out how serious they are.
Which takes us to Chapter 4, Assessing Risk. So we've listed the hazards, now we evaluate them.
Precisely. How likely is this hazard to cause trouble, and how bad would that trouble be? Likelihood and severity.
The handbook defines likelihood. Probable, occasional.
Probable, occasional, remote, improbable. With examples. Flying into a known severe thunderstorm makes exceeding structural limits probable.
And severity. Catastrophic, critical.
Catastrophic, critical, marginal, negligible. Again, with examples. Thunderstorm penetration, potentially catastrophic. Minor runway overrun with no damage.
Negligible. And the risk assessment matrix in Figure 401 helps combine these.
Yes. You plot likelihood against severity, and it tells you if the composite risk is high, red, serious, yellow, medium, green, or low.
Helps visualize the level of danger.
And tells you what needs mitigation. Red absolutely needs action or a no-go. Yellow needs action. Green is generally acceptable.
Important point.
Well,
start this assessment before the flight.
Way before. Don't do it under pressure at the airplane. And watch out for errors the handbook mentions. Accuracy, be conservative. Get a second opinion if unsure. Skewing, don't let your desire to fly bias your assessment. Obsolescence, reevaluate if conditions change.
So back to Tricia. She assesses the risks she identified using this matrix.
Yes. Figures 4.2 through 4-5 detail her assessment for pilot risks, like her IFR proficiency, aircraft risks, fuel range, lack of icing gear, environment, weather, terrain, and external pressures, meeting deadlines.
She rated her IFR proficiency concern as serious.
Given the potential for IMC, yes. And flying her non-ice protected aircraft towards potential icing, she rated that high.
Makes sense. Figure 4 to 6 shows her completed initial FRAT with all the risks assessed.
Correct. It clearly lays out the initial likelihood, severity, and overall risk level for each hazard before any mitigation. Now she knows what she needs to tackle.
All right, Chapter 5, Mitigating Risk. This is where we take action.
This is the doing something about it phase. How do we reduce the likelihood or severity of those high red and serious yellow risks?
Goal is to get everything down to medium, green, or low.
Ideally, yes. And if a high risk cannot be mitigated effectively.
Oh, go. Simple as that.
Simple, but sometimes hard to do. The handbook notes strategies differ based on the hazard type. Pilot, aircraft, external pressure risks often respond to direct action.
Whereas environmental risks
Often require avoidance. Fly around it, above it, below it, or delay cancel.
Okay. Mitigating pilot risks. What strategies?
Personal minimums are key. Extra training, especially scenario-based. Honest self-evaluation using IMSAFE. Sometimes just resting or delaying is the mitigation.
Mitigating aircraft risks.
Build-in margins, don't plan on minimum fuel or runway length. Use aircraft with better equipment or redundancy if needed. Fix maintenance issues before flight. Thorough inspections. Choose the right aircraft for the mission.
Environmental risks, mostly avoidance, you said.
Yeah. Circumnavigate weather. Change altitude. Change departure time or date. If none of that works, cancel.
And external pressures. How do you mitigate those?
Communication is huge. Let people know plans might change. Manage expectations, especially for business travel. Have backup plans, commercial flights, driving. Distinguish must get there from nice to get there flights.
So, back to Trisha's flight. How did she mitigate her identified risks?
She made several changes. Realized nonstop was too risky with fuel and weather. Planned a fuel stop. Took a more southerly route to avoid the worst forecast weather. You see that in Figure 5.1.
What else?
Left a day earlier to beat some weather. Had passengers meet her at Durango, KDRO, instead of a smaller field, giving her a longer runway for takeoff given the conditions. And she increased her personal minimums for instrument approaches for this specific flight. Added a buffer.
So Figure 5.2 shows the updated FRAT after these mitigations.
Exactly. You can see how her actions lowered the assessed likelihood and/or severity for many items, bringing those red and yellow risks down.
The handbook lists her specific actions clearly.
Yes, added approach minimums, rested, planned the fuel stop, early departure, different departure airport, southern route, a whole package of mitigation.
And the flight itself.
She stopped for fuel as planned, checked weather again, briefed passengers on potential diversions, and ultimately landed safely in Santa Rosa. Successful risk management in action.
The chapter ends by stressing balance, right?
Yeah.
Not every flight needs a full written-off FRAT.
Correct. A simple VFR flight in good weather might just need a mental PAVE check. But for complex flights, IFR, long cross-country marginal weather, a more formal process like a FRAT, perhaps learned through an SRM course, is highly recommended.
Okay, Chapter 6 moves into the flight itself. Threat and Error Management, or TEM.
Right. This is about managing the unexpected stuff that happens after takeoff. Threats, external events, errors, pilot actions that reduce safety.
Define threats again. External, increased complexity.
Yep. Unexpected system malfunctions, unforecast weather popping up, traffic conflicts, sudden visibility changes, airport closures, controller errors, things outside your direct control that demand attention.
And errors, deviations from intended actions.
Exactly. Can be unintentional slips, like misreading an altitude, or intentional deviations, like knowingly descending below a minimum altitude. They reduce safety margins, can cause confusion, increase workload.
What causes errors? Handbook mentions several things.
Insufficient training or experience for the situation. Poor planning or preparation, the example of the pilot diverting due to unforecast weather and low fuel because they didn't plan, alternates well. Physiological effects, IMSAFE factors again.
And psychological factors.
Stress, emotion. Also biases, like expectation bias, seeing what you expect, not what's there. The handbook mentions pilots landing at the wrong airport or missing crucial note TAM info because of this. Confirmation bias, too. Even pilot personality.
Errors can lead to an undesired aircraft state. UAS.
Right. The plane's in a wrong place, wrong speed, wrong configuration, or the pilot's confused, overloaded, safety margins are shrinking.
So what are our defenses against threats, errors, and UAS in flight?
The handbook groups them. First, defenses provided to the pilot. Checklist, operating limitations, pilot qualifications, standard operating procedures, SOPs, is applicable, even insurance rules. Best practices from owner groups, too.
Using a second pilot is another defense.
Can be, yes. 2 heads are often better than 1. But it needs good crew resource management, CRM. It can also introduce communication challenges if not managed well.
External resources are also defenses.
Absolutely. Flight service for weather updates, ATC for guidance and separation, dispatch for airline ops, and knowing when and how to declare an emergency.
And finally, defenses the pilot provides themselves.
This is where the pilot's skills come in. Clear communication and briefings, good situational awareness, knowing what's going on around you and with your aircraft, planning ahead, what's next, time management, teamwork, even as a single pilot interacting with ATC, automation management, we'll get to that, and fundamental flying skills as the ultimate backup.
The Swiss cheese model, figure 6:1, illustrates these layers.
It's a great visual. Each layer of defense, cheese slice, has holes, weaknesses. An accident happens when the holes line up. Good defenses and pilot proficiency make the holes smaller and less likely to align.
Chapter 6 wraps up emphasizing discipline. Figure 6.2 lists operational pitfalls.
Hugely important. Consistently doing things right, following procedures, resisting those hazardous attitudes. Discipline is the glue that holds the defenses together.
Okay, Chapter 7. Automation and flight path management. Increasingly relevant.
Very much so. Automation, autopilots, FMS, etc. can reduce workload, enhance situational awareness, let pilots focus on the flight path rather than just controlling the aircraft moment to moment. Figure 7.1 shows a typical autopilot interface.
But there are cautions, right? It's not a magic bullet.
Definitely not. It can increase workload and confusion if misunderstood. Complacency is a risk, letting the automation fly while you mentally check out. Manual flying skills can degrade if you always use the autopilot. The icing example highlights this. And reprogramming automation under pressure can introduce errors. You must stay proficient in manual flying.
So it's about balance.
Exactly. Use automation as a tool, not a replacement for skill. Choose the right level of automation for the task. Be ready to take over manually. Sometimes turning it off is the safest thing to do, like the approach clearance change example. And practice manual flying regularly.
Figure 7.2 gives a process for interacting with automation. Anticipate, act, verify.
Critical loop. Know what it should do. Anticipate. Tell it what to do. Act. Check that it is doing it. Verify. The example of changing navigation sources in Figure 7.3 shows how misunderstanding the logic can lead to trouble if you don't verify.
Failure to follow that loop
Leads to loss of situational awareness, confusion, errors. The Columbia CFIT accident is mentioned as a tragic example where misunderstanding and mismanagement of automation played a role.
But automation is beneficial, especially single-pilot IFR.
Hugely beneficial in high workload situations. And it's a big, but lack of proficiency with the automation is itself a hazard.
So training is key.
Absolutely. Train under VFR with an instructor first. Use simulators. Read the manuals and supplements. Know the limitations and emergency procedures for your specific systems.
Right. Final chapter, Chapter 8. Aeronautical Decision-Making in Flight, ADM.
Bringing it all together. ADM is the structured way pilots think through problems and make choices in flight to manage risk. Advisory Circular 6022, shown in Figure 8.1, has much more detail.
Even with technology and training, judgment errors still happen. ADM helps mitigate that.
That's the idea. It provides a mental framework. Research shows ADM training reduces judgment errors.
The handbook explains analytical decision-making using the 3P model. Perceive, process, perform. Figure 8.2.
Yes. Perceive the circumstances. For example, developing thunderstorm ahead. Process the impact on safety. Evaluate your options. Perform the best course of action, for example, divert. It's a continuous loop. Keep perceiving, processing, performing.
Then there's naturalistic decision-making for experienced pilots in time-critical situations.
Right. Based on experience and pattern recognition. The example of the pilot delaying rotation due to seeing a turkey vulture near the runway, Figure 8.3, they recognized the pattern from a previous bird strike experience and acted quickly. It gets better with experience but doesn't replace analytical ADM or procedures when time permits.
And the chapter ends with Single Pilot Resource Management, SRM.
Essentially, it's CRM for one pilot, managing all available resources inside the cockpit, charts, automation yourself, and outside, ATC, flight service, weather briefings. It includes situational awareness, communication, task management, ADM, risk management, CFIT awareness, automation management, all the skills we've discussed.
Need to know what resources you have and if you have time to use them effectively.
Exactly. Proficiency with your equipment is part of SRM. Good pre-flight planning thinking through potential what-ifs like diversions or system failures really strengthens your SRM capability in flight.
Okay, quite a journey through the handbook. So, wrapping up this deep dive.
Yeah.
The core ideas seem to be continuous awareness and proactive management.
I think that's fair. Understanding risk, setting personal boundaries, systematically identifying hazards, assessing them realistically, and then actively mitigating them.
Plus managing threats and errors as they happen in flight, using automation wisely, and applying structured decision-making processes like ADM and SRM.
Consistently applying these principles really does build that foundation for safer, more confident, and ultimately more enjoyable flying. It's not about eliminating risk entirely, that's impossible, but managing it intelligently.
So the final thought for you, the learner. We've talked a lot about managing risk in the specific context of aviation.
But think about it, how can you apply these same concepts? Identifying hazards, assessing likelihood and severity, finding ways to mitigate risks. How can you use that framework to make better, more informed decisions when you face uncertainty in other parts of your life? Something to ponder.
Definitely food for thought. We really encourage you to check out the Risk Management Handbook itself for even more detail.